I do not recall exactly what I discussed with Mr. Claridge. I know that there was a point in time where he certainly did become aware, and it may be through sensitive intelligence, because the intelligence showed what was being moved. And I did at some point along there confirm to him that it was not oil drilling equipment, but that it was Hawks. As was very obvious to almost everybody out there at that point, because they were reading the same sensitive intelligence that I was. Well, when I say that point, I don't know exactly what point it is, but I did at some point confirm to him that that's what was taking place, and it may have been after the fact. I'm not saying that it was before the fact. And at that point, Mr. McMahon was very upset with me.
Now, at what point was Mr. McMahon very upset with you?
As I recall, it was after the pilots returned from their mission, or in which he saw a part of the sensitive intelligence. And I don't recall the specific timing, but it was at that point that we began to work on the finding with Mr. Sporkin, I think.
Well, the record reflects that the finding was transmitted by Director Casey in a cover memo dated the 26th of November. That's Tuesday.
Okay. So it would be in that time frame, I would guess.
You're talking that day or earlier?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, maybe one of the things, and I don't recall it specifically, but one of the things I may have done on that Sunday would have been to work on the finding, although I would guess the finding didn't actually begin till later on.
Committee's other information would indicate that the finding began on the Monday.
Okay.
But I'd like to take you back to the Friday-Saturday period of time when efforts were being made to obtain the landing rights in the European country, and you ran into a snag because we were unwilling to identify the material in writing. I guess first I'd like to ask you, was it your understanding that the material had not been identified orally?
To whom?
To the foreign government officials.
I'm not sure that I ever had a particularly clear understanding as to what the foreign officials ever did know about that. And I guess at some point General Secord may have told me what he told them. He knew because I had briefed him before he left. But I don't know what he or the U.S. government people on scene actually told the foreign officials.
Well, you can't land 120 or let's say 80 Hawk missiles in a jumbo jet, unload it, store it, and then put it back on 3 small planes at an airport without people there knowing that you're transporting something other than oil drilling equipment, can you?
Well, it depends on what they're packed in, but I mean, what you've just hit on is one of the reasons why we were so concerned with this whole operation to begin with.
Well, what I'm asking is...
There were major problems operationally in this thing right from the start. And what bothered me most of all, and I think I communicated that fairly clearly to my superiors, is here, fix it. And the thing is already on fire when they throw the bag to you, and you know what's in the bag. It's a serious problem.
Well, my question to you is, when you suggested to Mr. McFarland that he obtain approval from the foreign government official, are you telling us that it was your understanding that Mr. McFarland wasn't going to mention what he was asking approval for?
I was going to leave that up to Mr. McFarland's judgment. He knew what was on that airplane. I knew what was in the airplane. I'm asking him to talk to the foreign official to get permission for him to get the airplane on the ground. I mean, I don't think I made a recommendation one way or the other when I communicated with him.
In any event, Mr. Claridge during this period of time is sending cables back and forth to the embassy in the foreign country on this same issue. And my
I take
question...
it that he was. I'm not sure that I ever saw any of those cables, but I may have.
Well, I don't want to go over them one by one, but there are a number of them which have been marked exhibits, and they are 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, and 69. You needn't read them because my question is going to be the same. My question is going to be, was Mr. Claridge aware at the time when he was responsible for sending cables back and forth on this issue that the thing had run aground because we were unwilling to identify the cargo in writing?
And I cannot answer that question because I don't know.
Do you say you don't know or you don't recall?
Well, the way you asked your question is, was Mr. Claridge aware? And I don't recall when Mr. Claridge became aware. I do recall confirming to him at some point that it was not oil drilling equipment, that it was Hawks. And it was my understanding that at that point he talked to either the director of operations or to the deputy director, who became angry. And I think there may be a contemporaneous note in my my notebooks to that effect.
In other words, you're saying that you told Mr. Claridge what the real cargo was prior to the time the deputy director got angry and insisted on a finding.
I'm not saying that for sure. I'm saying that's the way it may well have happened. I do recall, although I do not recall the time and date, confirming to Mr. Claridge, when asked, the cargo is not oil drilling equipment, the cargo is Hawks. Okay, now I cannot tell you, Mr. Niels, here at this point, a good while after the fact, when that point was.
But I take it you're saying it was very close in time to when the shipment actually was sent, and your best recollection is that it was prior to the time that the deputy director hit the roof, so to speak.
Yes, I mean, my recollection is that's why he hit the roof.
Now, I'm going to return to the question of what officials knew about this shipment in a moment. But before I do, I want to return to the question of why only 18 Hawks were sent and there were no further shipments. Was it part of the agreement as you understood it that all of the hostages would be released before the plane carrying missiles arrived in Tehran?
I don't recall exactly what the arrangement was. I've having been through a number of these iterations with the Iranians themselves, with their intermediary, with the Israeli agent Ghorbanifar, with all of those actors, I would find it to be inconsistent with what happened for the following year in these transactions to believe that the Iranians had agreed to something like that. But having not been a party to that original agreement, it is much more likely that there was a phased, step-by-step arrangement made, because that's the way it worked in every proposal and in every transaction that ever occurred after that.
Exhibit 43 is a prof message that you sent on the 20th of November to Mr. Poindexter. And on the second page, you describe this transaction. And in the middle of the first full paragraph, you say, no aircraft will land in Tabriz until the AMSITs have been delivered to the embassy.
Where was that again?
It's in the middle of the first full paragraph. Take your time if you want. My question's going to be, having read that, does that refresh your recollection in any way that that was the understanding at the time?
Well, that is clearly what someone had told me. And I don't know whether that was the Israelis or whether that was what I was reading out of sensitive intelligence, or whether that was relayed back to me by General Secord. And it could have been all of the above. That was not something that I had negotiated. It was simply something I was reporting back up the line.
Did that provide a reason not to continue with any further shipments of Hawks? I take it no hostages came out after before the plane landed.
No, there was no one released in November.
Did that provide a reason to stop shipments?
Well, it may have, but what I was told, okay, in the midst of this thing, was the reason we're stopping is because the Iranians are so upset with the product that they have received. And the product that they had received, I was told, and there was apparently some confirmation of that in the sensitive intelligence, is that they'd been told they were going to get Super Hawks or something. And what they got is plain old Hawks. And that they were upset.
I understand that, and we appreciate your testimony. I'm going to continue asking questions to see whether it jogs any other recollections. And I take it that the fact that the hostages didn't come out is not, to the best of your recollection, the reason why the shipment stopped.
No, but again, I don't think I was fully aware of the arrangement that had been made at that time.
Okay, now, again, referring to the November 20th prof message, one paragraph further down, you discuss the subject of replenishment. And at the end of the paragraph, you say, I have further told them, that's the Israelis, that we will make no effort to move on their purchase LOA request, and that's their purchase order, I take it, for
yes,
replenishment Hawks, until we have all 5 AMSETs safely delivered.
Yes.
Now, the AMSETs were not delivered,
no.
Therefore, you had no obligation under this particular promise to replenish. And I'm asking, did the Israelis stop making shipments because they realized that they had no guarantee of replenishment?
I don't know. Again, I'm looking at this for the first time in a long time, but and my memory is jogged this a little bit. One of the problems that we came up with somewhere in this time frame was the fact that you couldn't do it that way. And I got a very quick education in what an LOA was and how it worked, and the AECA and the need for findings and all the rest of that over the course of that period of time between the 17th and the 26th. And it was a rather intense education.
That was going to be my next question. Did we call a halt to this thing because people in the Department of Defense told you or others at the NSC that the transactions were illegal?
No, I think what I was getting a sense for, counsel, was the fact that, look, we don't know what arrangements were made, what promises were made, but you can't do it this way. And I can remember a conversation with someone over there, and it may have been Mr. Cook or it may have been General Powell, saying, look, Ollie, you can't go and you can't have them just go ahead and submit a new bill. I remember at one point the Israelis were talking about making a cash transaction. Well, I didn't know it, but at DOD quickly informed me that's not how it's done. And thus, we came back to the CIA route and ultimately the finding and having the stuff purchased by the CIA from the DOD under the Economy Act. And that's the routing of it, and it's not a sinister thing. It was simply ignorance on my part that assumed you could do it with an LOA.
Well, we've had testimony from DOD officials before this committee that not only was the replenishment